Okay, good morning. It is Tuesday, April 16th in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We are jumping around since it is our last 2 weeks essentially of work in committee. Hi, Pat. We just went live. Ted, one of you can get in the witness chair, whichever you decided, or both of you.
What do you want to talk about first?
The budget is, do you mean from which perspective?
Yeah.
Which spreadsheet or?
Like, do you want to talk about PTT or you want to talk about appropriations?
Oh, transfer tag?
I think just both sit down and I'll give an overview
Okay, let's
and
do
then you guys decide where you want to start. So I'll give an overview since, you know, this is my effort to be as transparent as possible before the budget is voted out of Senate appropriations. My focus in that regard has been housing. There's a lot of other areas that are static or represent the governor's recommend. We could try to get to those pieces as well. But housing is obviously the big conversation about who's putting money in where, etc. So Ted and Pat will go into the details. What I will say is that we used the property transfer tax proposal that we have put forward that is not approved yet. So this is all pending finance approval and, you know, then booking the money in appropriations, but living in that world with the existing formula for the appropriation. So for Senator Kitchell, it was much easier if we looked at this in terms of let's not move around the percentages with the new increment. Let's just use our existing formula and see what it yields. And they can confirm, but to my understanding, when we did that and we applied new money to VHCB and other housing programs, the Senate now has more money appropriated for housing in FY25 in our budget proposal.
What?
And they're going to get into the details.
Right, because what I'd appreciate is, because I know there's also a House proposal on PTT. And
That is
well,
the Senate, the finance conversation.
I
Yeah.
know, but I'd like to know the difference of how much it raises
Right.
each of them. And how much ours raises, how much theirs raises, if there's any effort to do the one that raises the most. Because
I think they're just very different policy decisions, so
they
it's a
are,
Senate
so we
finance
could
question.
appreciate, yeah.
And I don't think we're just gonna go with the one that raises the most.
Well, I just love to see what the differences are.
Our budget figures raise more money for housing overall with our formula and use our
In the PTT.
proposal, our second home proposal.
Yeah.
And that's what we're generally looking at. You can ask the question about that at the end of this House proposal, but that's not the proposal that
It
our
raises,
committee
ours
is-
raises about 13.
they can explain. So I'll let them take over now.
Sorry, I just.
Do you want to start which was? We'll
Sure.
start with the PTT and we'll go.
Great.
You had read our minds.
Yes, so for the record, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office, it is, our estimate for the amount of revenue that would be generated by doubling the rate on secondary residences in the property transfer tax. Initially, I was talking 13 to 14 million, final polished numbers is 12.85. Part of that is you book a little less revenue in the first year of a tax while it's moving up and the rates have to adjust. Also, I took a look at full calendar 23 data as opposed to fiscal year 23 data, and the amount of revenue just decreased slightly. So looking at overall revenue of.
Just it would be helpful to have the spreadsheets while you're talking.
Do you want to put it up?
Is it on our
Do you want to
These
give
are,
it?
these are kind of a working.
They're working
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
So we
we
just-
understand that, we get that.
Are we
We'll
able
we'll
to?
have,
Okay.
we'll definitely have sort of summarized,
Okay.
very, sorry, I should also say actually here's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have something very easy to digest.
Yeah.
But
And I will say,
we can
I've
send your way.
entered further into their world of truing this up with everything else that appropriations is looking at, which is very difficult. So
It is.
I don't,
It's hard.
yeah, this is, we'll do with, you know, we'll do with this what we
It
can.
depends on the second home market too.
Right,
We've
that's
been through the glut
Yeah,
and it may decline or it may continue to go up.
right.
And
So let's hear everything and then go to philosophical.
debate.
Sure, yes, and to the point, I did, just because I was concerned that maybe post-pandemic, all the
Mhm.
secondary houses were bought up essentially, and
Right.
making sure that there was still room. And surprisingly, the share of secondary residences in calendar 23 is very similar to 19. The big difference is the amount of value transfer.
Mhm.
Oh,
Right.
huge.
And so the average transfer of the secondary residence in 2019, the value was like half of what it was in
Mhm.
2023. So yes, it's just an entirely different world.
My house doubled really crazy.
Mhm. Okay,
Yes,
Market
so
value or appraisal.
okay,
Yes.
let's,
Okay, so the revenue
half it.
12.8 million.
12.85 million. And so
and every penny matters, right? So just,
yes,
we're not rounding off.
And that's in 25.
that is in fiscal year 25.
That's current budget.
Yes, exactly. And so the way we looked at it both using the current law percentage allocations and also using the budgetary notwithstand. And working within, because the current budget notwithstand the GovRec, you have to work with a certain amount of general fund revenue and kind of start from there. Within our, that is, what am I trying to say here? So we're starting from that place of the budget notwithstand.
Does everyone understand the notwithstand?
Kind of. It's like even though something in statute, we don't do it.
Yes, and so the allocations, the percentage allocations that are in statute, the 33% to the general fund, 50% to the housing and conservation trust fund, 17% to the municipal regional planning fund, that gets notwithstood, and then they have dollar figures for the housing and conservation trust fund and the municipal and regional planning fund. And those dollar figures are what are in the budget every year, and this has been done for decades.
Which
With
is
the
part
property transfer
So
tax.
the actual dollar, like whatever millions,
Exactly,
doesn't go up
yes, and
with
so.
inflation or anything.
It does, so
Or-
with each year, they propose a new amount, a new dollar amount, and the amounts for the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund and the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund is up 3% from fiscal year 24. So they do make adjustments over time.
Okay.
And so working from that budget notwithstand, the allocations, is taking 12.85 million. 900,000 would go to NRP. And then there would be,
It ends up being over $1 million because it's 900,000 flat for
yeah,
the lost revenue, but then it's 116,000 that the House proposed for 2 attorney positions is also in there.
awesome.
So
Or is that?
so it's kind of a funny little construct that you'll have to work through with
Okay.
corporations because that dollar figure refers to 2 attorney positions for 6 months.
Oh,
So once
it's
you go
one
into the
time.
next year, you'll have to true that up. And also if you move to a professionalized board,
Oh, yeah.
those costs will have to be
Right.
accounted for.
Right.
So it's either a question of,
But
is
we,
NRP coming off the top or
Yeah.
does this become part of their regular budget?
our S311 proposal is the only one that gives $1 million-ish to the NRB.
Yeah.
Every other bill has about 116,000.
Yeah, so the way that the House bill was constructed, so you have the, basically that same construct, you have the home bill where you have X number of units, X amount of land, you had that kicking in right away
Mhm.
for the phase-in period for the tiers, the House didn't have that.
Mhm.
So they didn't account for it because it wasn't until fiscal year 27. that
Mhm.
lost
They don't
it.
have exemption, so they
Right.
don't see lost revenue the same way.
So I understand positions, but that's cost, that's not
That's one.
what's coming, that's not revenue. So there's no, what other revenue is coming in for the NRB that is being, to get it up to
We're giving them an off the top from this property transfer tax.
the 900,000.
Yes,
No, I appreciate that, but you said it somehow became $1 million somewhere. But what you talked about, those positions are actual costs, not revenue.
well, we allocate 900,000 to them.
Right.
As cost as well for their work. So
Right, out of the.
what I was saying is in our larger property transfer tax proposal, I thought we were also separately giving a line item for 116,000 to honor the House desire to put
Oh, I
into
see,
an
that
attorney
that was the
position.
payment up,
So the NRB would ultimately
Yeah.
hit over a million, but that might be somewhere else in the budget.
but
Yeah,
that
so
would
the
pay for
way,
one.
the way this is kind of constructed is it'll kind of all trickle down, and what Ted's gonna get to is, eventually what the new incremental revenue, what is allocated to the different, like, from this new proposal, what gets split into the trust fund, what gets
Yeah.
paid to the general fund, and where we have those positions is in that bucket that's getting paid to the
Right.
general fund.
Right,
So we will
that makes
cover that in
sense.
a couple minutes. but-
Because we have to accommodate, appropriations has to be thinking one time versus ongoing.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
Great, so out of 12.85 million of additional revenue, 900,000 would go to the NRD, which would leave 11.95 million of remainder to be allocated across the three kind of percentage statutory, the folks who are already in the statutory allocation. Of that 11.95 million, 6.8 would be additional general fund. 5.1 million would be an increase to the Vermont Housing Conservation Trust Fund. This additional amount would bring the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund up to what their statutory 50% would be of current law revenues, so without the additional 12.85 million. And then the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund would be level funded compared with what is in the governor's recommended budget. And
That
so.
one, the last thing we talked about, we had talked about that they would get the additional increment.
Yeah.
12.85.
I think, I mean, from what,
It was like 1.5 million that,
so 1.5, it's 1 point, so the additional increment they would get under statute would be almost $2 million. That could be, I mean, so the contract we worked up didn't have that in there. I know there is,
specifically remembered wanting that.
Cause that's the RPC money that's gonna
Yeah,
finance the math and.
right,
working
that
with
we
the
wanted to
countries.
use the,
So is that envision coming out of the general?
I am having trouble now that I can't see what you were looking at, because we had. I was wondering if you were gonna go to a different place, but we talked about a lot of different allocations. And it was predicated on first booking the new increment going percentage wise to regional municipal planning. So maybe I should go back to what I think was supposed to happen, which is we have the new 12.85. The appropriate percentage goes off the top for VHCB, appropriate percentage goes off the top for regional and municipal planning. What's left was something like 4 million or so. And that was going to go to the Land Access and Opportunity Board, the NRB, the refugee housing, the mobile home support. There were a couple others, and that's the last thing we had talked about.
so I remember, so we talked about two, so one is working with the statutory formula that, because of the way the budget construction works.
Yeah,
Doing those allocations, those percentage allocations, the new current law revenue is only $21.8 million that would go to the general fund, that working with 33%. But the GovRec starts the general fund at $25.1 million. And so in order to make that work, you
sorry.
have to go back
Can you
to
say
the-
that again?
Yes, so,
What you're saying we raise
so
isn't meeting what the governor.
so under current law,
Uh-huh.
like the statutory allocations.
Yeah,
In order with the new revenue,
so the regional municipal funding was also not withstood,
yeah, so then,
and so we're not giving them a net increase at all.
so,
Or they're getting more than they would have gotten under our proposal, because part of our goal was to give them more than they would have gotten to do all of this land use mapping work.
Yes.
yeah, so one consideration is with the box that Pat will talk about in the
Mhm.
appropriation, there is remaining general fund to allocate of almost $1.3 million.
I thought we had done it without, I thought we had said, okay, we can give that back because we've satisfied our concerns. Pat, do you remember that?
I don't remember the specific conversation about.
So
municipal.
don't we have?
That was really
We
important.
have a solution here, I think.
Well, the solution might be the extra 1.3 million, but Jane, I mean, that's,
So
You
the
know.
6.8 to the general fund. Can't that be reduced to 5.5?
well,
for
we
the
were
general
talking,
fund?
all the money we're talking about lives within this appropriation of the general fund. That was our then ability to look at what would fund housing. And however it happened, we just need to look at this again because the regional municipal planning was really important to us.
Yes, it's essential,
Yeah.
or it will, the ground up mapping
This
is
is
where.
why we're doing this like every day
Oh,
until
yeah.
we get it right.
Yep.
Okay, but can you list the other allocations so I don't forget that we had talked about within
Sure.
the general fund?
So in that 6.8 that Ted referenced, we had talked about 1 million going to JHCD for manufactured homes, 1 million for VHIP, 1 million.
And I will say Jane is
This
looking
is-
for 5 million additional for VHIP elsewhere. In
Five?
other funds, yeah,
Yeah.
to get to 6 million VHIP.
Then there was 1 million for the first generation home buyer program, 500,000 for farm worker housing, the 1 million for that LAOB that we was just mentioned.
The land access,
Yeah,
how much was that?
That was 1 million. And then there was 900,000 for the refugee housing, the 112,500 for the attorney positions, and then
Sorry, how much for the attorney?
You gotta go slow when we gotta write it down.
112,000.
Okay, that's not even enough for one position.
It's 6 months.
It's 6 months.
That's what the House proposed is funding them for 6 months and then figuring the rest out next year.
In the budget of waterfall. In the BAA,
This is FY 25 6 months.
so that gets us to December.
That would
FY 25.
presumably starting in December.
FY 25 starts July 1st.
So
So
gives
half the
NRB
year.
It gives
It's
NRB the
December.
flexibility whether they want to get 2 or
Right.
1 and when the start date for that is, because
Right.
the reason that they wanted them had to do with it's nice to get them on board during this transition phase so that they can already get on the ground running when the professionalized board comes about. I know there was a different construct where you all had talked about adding a new judge, but there is this transition to the tier system that NRB thinks would be very beneficial to them to make that a smooth transition.
Well, in the construct that was proposed by the House, they don't
Yes.
think that will be beneficial to them, but they need help if they're going to accommodate anything
That's
close to
better
what the
way to
House
say
is proposing. Uh,
And then the last piece was the 10,500 for the eviction study committee. Yeah, for the per diems, and so all of those together, with what we've talked about so far, there's about 1.3 that has not been allocated.
Right.
That is, we've had general fund.
yes, I thought that was some kind of largesse we were giving back to Jane for lots of other important priorities,
RPC.
but the regional and municipal planning, I think, if it wasn't brought in, needs to be not withstood and use that funding.
Here.
That is our housing universe of dollars, so all I tried to do in Jane and Senate appropriations timeframe is take most of what was in S311 and find a home for it. What
In the 6.8.
that, so don't have anything to look at, but from what people are hearing, questions, philosophical discussion now for the next 10 minutes.
Would like to have something to look at.
I know, but that is,
I know.
I don't think it's in
I know
anyone's
it's a
hands
moving
here,
target.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
So can I just go down my list, make sure I wrote it down right?
Yeah.
So 6.8, that's going to the general fund. So that's new money to the general fund. So that's why we're able to specify where we want it to be spent.
This is our suggestion
Or
for
our-
Senate appropriation,
Okay,
if we approve this property tax transfer.
okay, so 1 million to mobile homes. And that's for the mobile home rehab.
Yes, yes,
Great, and then 1 million to VHIP to obviously increase what people can do.
yes, with 5 million elsewhere being called.
Okay. And then 1 million to first generation, good stuff. 500,000 farm worker housing, would
Mhm.
that be? Because I'm not sure about how those programs work, I mean, I know we've talked
Yeah.
about it, how would that?
Right, So this is a whole nother wrinkle that again is easier to look at when we can look at a spreadsheet. Where we are now increasing what VHCB would be getting. And they have, so we hadn't talked about farm worker housing in this bucket. We had talked about farm worker housing in the VHCB bucket.
Yeah, so what was sort of conveyed to me was, well, it's great for them to have sort of the appropriation from the trust or the access to the trust fund money for this particular program.
That was refugee housing. We said they can take care of farm, because farm worker housing was in the spreadsheet under there.
We can certainly take that.
So let's take that out and get that to regional municipal planning also.
And maybe, okay,
Farm worker housing is really still undefined, at least in my mind, as to what is meant by that.
We can get what that means, but that's why it was sort of I saw it as something VHCB has committed to with their existing allocation. And so I looked at the things in the spreadsheet that went under VHCB and said, good, those are essentially covered by the new increment we're giving them. And farm worker housing is not one of them.
okay, so we'll take that off this
Yes,
list, but
But it's
still
being
wanted
funded.
to figure out what.
And
And there's, I think there's multiple ways,
Right.
like one is giving money to farmers to produce the housing, and the other one was giving, finding those houses and
yeah,
subsidizing.
we kind of leave it to
Mobile
VHCB to see what money will produce the most good.
Yeah, but I think, and there are good economies of scale
Right,
recently,
So-
just with the,
Farm worker housing on the farm is not subject to property tax. So I think you'll find that's where most of it will get built.
yes, right.
Bobby Starr and I, many years ago, had a core debate on whether or not farmers should be able to buy a downtown apartment building and have a tax exemption.
Right, so
Uh,
on farm dwellings
that's not-
are
On
tax
farm.
exempt.
yeah, and they, obviously, we need quality.
And
Housing.
who owns what, and what are the long-term implications of that, as well as,
Right,
as usage, as well as.
and I think we can, I think we have VHCB. We have, when we do the housing inventory tomorrow morning, so reminder, we're starting at 8:30 AM for the rest of the week.
Oh, I thought I saw 8:15.
I moved it to 8:30 because I heard everyone thought I'd clear. So everything, well, we're doing 8:30. So
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
these two.
yeah, exactly. So we're starting at 8:30. We have the HCB in tomorrow at 8:30. And we can flag that we want to ask them. I do think the farmer ends up owning it for tax purposes and just because that's the easier way.
Well, it's also their land, I mean.
Right, so we'll,
Yeah, as long as, yeah,
Well,
that's,
it's a very awkward.
Farms are going away, what happens then? I just wanna understand what the change
Okay.
is. If the farm is there today and gone tomorrow,
Right.
who owns the house and?
Both
Who
my
gets-
working farms, it's not good now.
can someone
We're losing.
around the room ask Polly to be ready to talk about their farm for housing program? Thank you, Chris.
I'd just like to understand.
okay, and then just 1 million land access,
Mhm.
I understand that, we have talked about it,
What we talked
Maybe
about, I
talk-
still don't
talk
quite
about it more.
understand it fully, and I think it needs to be talked about more.
okay.
As to who's the beneficiary and why.
Okay, and then the refugee housing, that is 100,000 less than what they.
Yeah, but there's no money here to build this.
No, I'm incredibly grateful, and they are too, to have this funding in the budget, that's huge.
Right.
It hasn't been in the budget before, and I asked them to get me information on
Yeah,
the impact of this being, I think, it was just under 1 million, it was like 998 was the initial ask.
when it got to me, it just looked like 900,000, so.
Okay, well, I'm trying to get the impact of that, and I can speak to
And it
this
is
more.
Yeah, it's,
Because this is just so
Right.
important.
I will say
And it's for the
it's
whole
one
state.
time. It is one time. And I am asking Home Share to come back to us with a proposal next year for one position that would be dedicated to refugee placement in partnership home.
Okay, so let's,
Because that I think is an ongoing appropriation we can afford. I don't know that we can,
Okay.
well, Senator Kitchell's very interested in that proposal too, because we don't have ongoing money booked specifically for refugee housing. When there are many people who would be willing to share their home with an incoming refugee family who might not otherwise participate in home share.
yes, but can this be more of a conversation? Like not
Of course.
just now?
Yeah,
Because-
but just know this is one time and I don't get to
No, I
do that
understand.
conversation either.
Okay,
It is a conversation for next year, but
well, can we have the conversation? I just want people to understand what this is for.
when we do LAOB next week, we can also do refugee
Okay.
housing.
Okay,
You add 15 minutes for that, okay.
because it's very different in the southern and the northern.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So we need ECDC and USCRI to talk about how the money's spent, and we have to talk about who is spending the money best, and I know that you have advocated well that ECDC is spending that money well.
There's good things about both. They're very different. I just want the state to understand how
Yes.
different they are.
And what that 900,000 is going for, because it's one.
Yes, and what we should think about in the future, what
Exactly.
makes sense to subsidize and what doesn't.
Yeah, so that, I just wanna say, these conversations won't influence today's budgetary process, where all of these groups have also talked to Senator Kitchell, Senator Perchlik, and it's obviously still up for debate until we vote for the budget, but I was working within the back and forth we've had in this committee and that your committee has had.
Okay,
Yes,
So, I think this is, I like this PTT proposal, as you know, I think it's terrific. My only concern is that for general housing, affordable housing, we need to keep moving on, we need thousands and thousands of units. That we only have 5.1 million here for all the rest of that important work. I love the work, all these things represent, it's just not enough for it. And I know we're focusing on regulation, I appreciate that.
mhm.
But I also know that we can chew gum and walk at the same time.
So I just wanna reiterate that this is more money for VHCB and these specific housing programs than in the FY 25 House budget. We can talk in finance about FY 26 and beyond, but we don't have jurisdiction over taxes that have not been raised in this biennium.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate the fact that we desperately need to find somehow. Now, I know that a lot of the money from the house is contained in H 829, which I know has
But
several
that's FY
challenges.
26. I just wanna be
No, no,
really
I-
clear to
I
the
know.
public. Because it's very confusing to say we're promising money that doesn't exist. We can't allocate that, we can't book it, we can't have a conversation about it.
we can have a conversation.
We can have a conversation about anything, but
We can't have a conversation about this year's budget using any, sense of
No, we
future
can't
money.
assume that it's this year's.
we are talking about FY 25's budget.
Okay.
Right,
I know, but I'm just putting that
Yes.
marker, that there is no money in this construct for, other than the 5.1 for VHCB, for continued affordable housing investments and for recovery housing in particular. In particular, recovery, but just also our housing. So as much as we can find,
There's money that
Additional money.
exists, there's housing money and general assistance, shelter money, et cetera, that exists in other places in the budget. That's not our
I know, but that's not
jurisdiction.
what I'm talking.
Okay, because there's a housing bill, there's a housing funding bill in health and welfare right now for more of what you're talking about. We're
Does that
going
have
to
the
be,
recovery money in it, the recovery housing money in it?
does that exist in the FY 25 budget?
Or is that all taken care of in another bill? I mean, because the problem is the House did this differentiation and put.
And that's not workable for Senate appropriations. They spent $130
No,
million
I appreciate
of FY 26 money in a non-budgetary bill. In a bill that's
So
not.
we appreciate this.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, I know that it's complicated and it's come up to us in a funky way. I'm just saying, as much as we can find for money in our budget for continuing affordable housing development and for recovery.
we are
I
only
would like
talking
to-
about FY 25 because we have an election.
I
We
know.
have a presidential election. We cannot be deciding now in good faith, many of us have been here for a long time, what we're spending in FY 26. The chair of Ways and Means said it publicly that that is a promise they made that people can hold them accountable to. We cannot have that conversation at the Housing Policy Committee because we don't have that.
I'm not proposing it for 26. I'm saying, I think we need to still find more money for housing. And I will mention this to Jane too, but I think as we look at all the housing proposals that are out there, I am hopeful that we can find.
Senator Clarkson, 3 of us are on finance, and what is important to remember is that we don't have many sources that we can raise that affect FY 25.
Right.
There's very few tax sources that impact FY
I
25.
appreciate it. I'm just, you wanted comments and
I think the public is extremely confused about what's going on, and I just find that unfortunate, and I
There's
think,
little that we can afford and there's little that we can borrow as well. So in terms of long-term funding, typically you think about bonding, we're constrained there as well.
Yeah. We're constrained sadly on all fronts, and I think the public hopefully
We
knows
just have
that.
to recognize the constraint and move on.
Right,
Yeah.
we have a $328 million bill for immediate health and safety issues in our schools.
Yeah,
I have no idea where I'm gonna get $328 million.
right,
let alone.
right.
paying
So
for school
because-
period.
I will just reiterate, finance has to have a conversation about need across the board. Appropriations has to have a conversation about need across the board. We are fitting ourselves into a responsible conversation about overwhelming need in every category.
Appreciate
You are not, I will say again, you are not hearing from me that I am going to spend FY 26 dollars
it. Yeah, no, I got
solely
it.
on
I got it.
housing when we don't have that power.
I appreciate that.
And when there are other pressing needs alongside housing.
I appreciate that.
I just want people to be extremely clear.
And I think some of the bills that have come out of the House have used up most of our taxing capacity. Those of us that have been here a while know this is not a bad year. The economy is still strong.
Yeah.
Just coming off federal.
Mhm.
You don't want to use up all of your taxing capacity and commit it because
And it's
when
not
the economy
responsible
does
to
go
say you
down, and it's cyclical, it will go
Right.
down. You need to have that capacity to keep essential services.
Right.
Well,
I appreciate it.
that does bring up another point, which is there is a waterfall list that you can also get from Senate appropriations. FEMA and just disaster related funding, we have to remember we have a flood too, is the first on the list.
Right.
Then VHCB, then VHFA. So we have, so housing are the second and third priority for any other revenues that come in. But, you know,
Which we will live in hope of.
we have to have a very serious and responsible conversation about FY 25. And we cannot commit general fund dollars past that.
Right, I wasn't proposing.
Okay. So if you wanna find an FY 25 source, you have sales taxes and you have
Well,
the property transfer tax to work with essentially.
I know, and you've been given your box. I appreciate that.
I helped develop this box, is
No, no.
what I wanna say.
And it's been given.
Well, she's been given a proposal for finance to consider.
Yeah.
I have no tax bills right now.
I know, well, soon
Somewhere
you'll
there's a
get
housing bill with
something.
all of
There's
that
housing
in
bill
it
with a
that
lot
at
of
some
that.
point should come to me.
Right,
But I have no tax bills. They are all attached to other programs.
That's true.
Which is
and I just wanna say,
precedent I haven't seen.
I also wanna clarify, I'm not calling anybody else who wants to commit FY 26 funds anything, but it would be irresponsible for me to say, to promise Vermonters that we have those dollars, because that's not our money to promise. And we're moving on.
So just to, I guess, come back to
Yeah.
sort of where we're at with this,
Mhm.
so with the non-listed amount that we referenced to the municipal regional planning fund, that allocation amount was the same as what the House had proposed. They did have the additional 1.5 appropriation, which was in H 687.
What was that? But that, yeah,
Yeah, what's that for 1.5?
I have to double check that, but they did have an additional pop up for the planning process for
For the RPCs?
yes, yes.
okay, that's good to know, so we're on the same page about that.
Yeah, so
They also had to make some of the funds whole because they took away revenue with their,
Fees, laws.
well, no, with their removal of their reduction of the property transfer tax on home values under 200,000. So they needed to find additional revenue to make that work as well.
So I hear you on wanting to, you know, give them some more for this purpose.
Yeah.
Where we're at, especially after removing the farm worker housing piece of this is
Mhm.
there's 1.7 that has not been allocated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to use that for this purpose, it's there within this contract.
I would do that. I mean, we are asking communities to do a lot of work that they don't have the financial capacity to do. So unless I hear differently, we'd move that toward regional.
The full amount or? Okay.
I absolutely support that.
That's about how much I thought. So,
1.7 million.
yeah.
We should
And
make sure
apologies.
that they can do it, because sometimes even if you have money, if you don't have people,
No, that, I
The
think.
regional planning commissions could do grants, but I mean, sure.
Charlie Parker came in here and said, Charlie Baker, I meant Charlie.
But not, he's not
Parker.
saying it's just.
So Charlie Baker came in and said they could and they would, and he even said this most ambitious date of December 26th. So we're holding Charlie to all of that.
okay,
And we should spend this fall talking about long-term housing funding for next biennium.
Absolutely.
That is what Vermonters should, the conversation that we should have. No one has wanted that for more or for longer than I have, but it is not something I can do to say to Vermonters, we promise you that money, because we have an election in between and we may have more natural disasters. The House wants paid family leave. The taxing capacity has been spoken for in many other ways in other proposals. And we can't responsibly speak for FY 26 at all right now.
And he wasn't proposing me. So, yeah, I agree.
We will do that
I
next year. Okay,
And what you can look for from us is today we'll have a summary sheet with all this information on it. Once it's all on their working copy, that should be spent.
okay, thank you so much. I think that does cover things. We are still on track for Senate appropriations to be taking the budget vote this afternoon. Okay, so that spreadsheet will go to them, the new ones. Okay, because otherwise I don't know if I have to like hurry or.
No,
Something.
So we're fine.
Okay, thank you so much. So. Speaking of other bills, we are looking at other housing policy provisions that live in other, hi, come on in. There are some chairs around, so anywhere you see a chair. There's a folded chair there. There's some of anywhere that policy language existed in housing bills that came over, we're learning about now. So, we want to weigh those policy proposals, and I have talked to the pro tem about when and how to move them, if they go into 687, 311.
Right.
As it's moving, where they go, but that's not totally a clear cut right now. So first, we're gonna focus on the recovery housing piece. We heard from a lot of the proponents of the recovery housing piece, and we have at least one organization that has concerns about that piece. So we have Brenda Siegel.
so this is H 639.
This is specifically the recovery residence eviction piece of H639.
Oh, right.
So we may move H639,
Okay.
or we may move vision
I just wanna
into another housing.
See what it looks like.
We just have too many housing bills right now, so I don't wanna add another one. Yeah.
For the record, I am Brenda Siegel from Newfane, Vermont, and I'm also the Executive Director of End Homelessness Vermont and a consultant on human services issues with a specialty in housing, homelessness, disability rights, criminal justice reform, and the overdose crisis. I'm gonna start actually just by saying that it turns out it's still really hard for me to this issue. And so bear with me. I have
Still
worked-
ongoing.
Well,
Okay. I have worked for several years as the only Vermont member of the national cohort to end the overdose crisis with People's Action, a member of the harm reduction subgroups, the Drug Policy Alliance, and the National Harm Reduction Coalition, and most recently been tagged to support heading up a research center and project of overdose crisis for the Tim Carpenter Institute. Most importantly for this testimony, though, to me, is that I'm a person with lived experience of losing loved ones to overdose. In 2018, my nephew, Kai Siegel, died of an overdose after a year in recovery. He was the son of my brother who died just over 20 years before him. Both suffered from bipolar and severe trauma. And with 20 years between them, we could not find the support that they needed in our state to survive. I had taken a huge part in Kaya's upbringing after my brother died, and losing him altered my life and the life of all the children in our family in ways that are impossible for me to describe. It is a loss that I wish on no one, and one that has happened to my family twice. I do want to name, as we begin, that I took issue during the walkthrough with the language of problematic residents. People with substance use disorder have.
Is that in the language of the bill?
It's not, but when
Okay.
the walkthrough happened, I just want to name that people with substance use disorder have a medical condition that, as you all know, when they often struggle with trauma and mental illness, which might impact their residents. And I would ask that we be cautious and that we ask people in the building to be cautious on how we talk about people who struggle with this medical condition.
Is there a language that you'd want them to use for people who are posing a threat to themselves or others in the space?
I would say that people that are struggling and that this may not be a good fit for them.
Okay,
I think that's a better way to talk about this issue, and I think that probably most recovery residences would agree with that as well. I just want to name that I often say that my nephew found recovery after being wrapped in love and compassion, and he relapsed and died after being wrapped in shame and stigma. And it's really important. What I found interesting about H 639, the bill this came over in, was that almost all parts of this bill provide protections for the tenants or home buyers, except for the part that exempts recovery residences from landlord-tenant law. That's a little more complex. Leaving protections up to a single nonprofit entity rather than statute does not provide oversight, true accountability, or protection. For 4 years, I was a member of an extremely diverse group of stakeholders who tried very hard, every person in the group, with the best of intentions, to come to an agreement on this issue. 2 years ago, we came to what I would say was a good compromise. However, one person in the stakeholder group did not agree to the compromise, and so they did not take it up. I found it extremely concerning that this bill that has been extremely controversial for years was tacked onto H 639 without testimony from all of those stakeholders, including the opposition on this issue. I do not support recovery residents' exemption from landlord-tenant law in H 639 as drafted. I would suggest that the exemption from landlord-tenant law be removed from the bill until such time as there is the ability to understand and implement what would be a proper balance of landlord, recovery home operators, and tenant residents' rights and protections that truly protects everyone.
can we pause? I think we need to go to questions. What was different about the other proposal?
It was more, it was more detailed. It included like
Okay.
particular protections for people. We're looking for that exact language so that we could offer it to you.
Okay.
I have other suggestions about the way that this could move forward.
Uh-huh.
But it did actually include a variety of things, and especially if we're doing something that's gonna sunset in a year after the health department has takes time to figure out what system they want to use, then the ways that it could be implemented is one, not to start until July of 2025 after the health department has had this opportunity.
The health
Or
department's had the opportunity.
I'm gonna forget the S-186.
I am the
In-
alliance. Okay.
In S-186.
Yeah.
To actually, they're charged with coming up with a process and a certifying body for certifying recovery residences.
Okay.
So we would then,
Oh, okay.
all
So
the
this is a
stakeholders,
little cart for the horse.
this is a cart before the horse. And the other option in my mind would be to, if it's going to be for just a year, to use the protections that people who opposed this bill wanted in place for this 1 year exemption that sunsets. So that there were those protections for the people that,
Can I make sure I understand this? The exemption from landlord tenant law wouldn't take place until those recovery residences are certified right now in the bill?
right now, in S 186, it asks the health department to come up with a, process for certifying and identify a certifying body.
Okay.
So that report isn't due till November,
Okay.
and then this body would take up anything that needs to be taken up
Okay.
next
So-
biennium.
The effective date of this provision of 639 is July of this year.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Senator Clark.
So, is it possible to, fold this into, either both the landlord tenant eviction study that we have going already, or is it just worth putting off the passage of this a year? I mean, we could easily in the,
It's such a different stakeholder group than
It is
the
a
eviction
different, yeah.
study group, it's not gonna work there.
so then is the other idea to incorporate it into 186 as something for them to look at?
So it could be something that S1, that they look at in S186, which is now in-house human services.
Is it moving to your knowledge?
The bill is moving, whether or not this, I believe an amendment is being added about this, but however, whether or not they actually take this up, there is
Okay.
some opposition in that.
Didn't we
committee
ask
as
for
well.
something else to move in S186? Was it the same piece?
It was,
Okay.
because I was here the other day when.
I'm struggling to like keep track of all the moving pieces.
Yeah.
So you might add that to your conversation that you started with
Mhm.
Chairwoman. Wood.
Would.
Okay,
I will
And-
ask Therese.
okay.
If it's okay,
Yeah,
if it's okay for me to continue.
yes, it's okay, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. If you have other questions, feel free to pause. So I just wanna, we already just talked about some of this, so I'm just gonna skip over.
Mhm.
I wanna be clear that the opposition is not that I don't think that we can find a solution.
Mhm.
It is because, the negative impacts of what can happen include incarceration, homelessness, trafficking, and sometimes overdose death.
Mhm.
And so those are really big consequences for something that has
Yeah.
not had the proper protections put in place. I don't want to be alarmist, but rather because this is the nature and the reality and the effect of destabilizing this population. While VTAR has made strides in this area, to our knowledge at End Homelessness Vermont, it is still true that people are ultimately at times exited into these dangerous situations. And not always because of relapse, some just because they're not a good fit for the home. So again, those protections need to be laid out and clear of where the exemption comes from. I think it's also important to note that recovery homes are not healthcare facilities, so that was brought up in testimony the other day. They often don't have, as you heard, sometimes there's no staff on site at night, there's not a healthcare provider always, there's not a therapist always, so if somebody is struggling, they don't necessarily have someone immediately to reach out to ask for help before that relapse occurs. And so they cannot be exempted the same way that a healthcare facility is for those reasons. There's two pieces. I remember an interview with Jedediah Pop in Southern Vermont. He works on recovery and the overdose crisis. He talked about how he had relapsed in housing in this interview, and he said, and I'll never forget it, I don't know if I ever would have been able to find recovery if my housing had been destabilized at that point. 3 weeks later, he found recovery again and is still in recovery today. As currently drafted, the bill codifies into law a practice that caused one of my nephews most extremely relapses. He was removed from recovery residence, not for relapse, but for other reasons, not being a good fit. He was not using at the time, and he had no safety or protection. I watched him spiral, unhoused, relapse, and in recent years, I've had to ask myself, would Kaya still be here if what people are asking to codify into law had not happened to him? And I have to be honest with myself that he might. He was doing the best I had ever seen him at that point. He had one more relapse and recovery and death. This means that I understand the risk, and understanding the risk means that I have to oppose this bill. I went back and looked over the research as well as stories that I had heard when deciding what would be the best practice for this population. And based on what I understand, the most up-to-date science and what we're learning on the effects of destabilization on housing, which we've all heard a lot about in the last few years, I believe this bill is not a good first step, but a step backwards. While the compromise that many of us came up with was not perfect, and again, I'm looking for the exact language, it recommended a strong compromise between diverse stakeholders, and I would have been one of the strongest supporters and champions of that bill had it moved forward. this current amendment does not come close to the spirit of that agreement. It is really just a wholesale.
I think we do have to
Mhm.
end testimony. Was there any new kind of point you needed to make or?
Well, the only two things that I would add are that I have those, I already said the three different ways that we could move forward with it. But I want to name in my current work, we see lots of people removed from recovery. So even though I'm more speaking about my personal and family experience today, we see the outcomes, and these are the population experiencing homelessness. And if we are able to immediately get them into a hotel and stabilize, and they may retain recovery. But if they end up with a period outside, then frequently they relapse.
Mhm.
And I just think that when we talk about supporting and protecting all people in the house, that word all has to include the person who's struggling to be successful there. They cannot be the only person we don't protect.
So you understand, I mean, what I think we've heard, and again, like, sorry, I know how personal this is for you.
Mhm.
My sister and my mother here in the state house, my sister was homeless for a while and struggling with dual diagnosis. I hear you and I get it. We were very close to losing her. What people are saying is they want a process that is a little faster if there's someone who can use that bed who also needs recovery support and access, and we have limited recovery beds. So you were saying you found a compromise where there still is a process by which that person does exit and does exit faster than usually eviction law allows.
But it better protects them and making sure that they have somewhere to go.
Okay.
It offers them just a sheet of paper that says, like, there's some guidelines right now that says, like, where these are the resources that you can reach out to.
Okay.
It had better protections as to why you can exit someone, because if you have the opportunity to have Tom Dalton in here to talk about this, the one case that we worked on together, there was somebody who was exited who it really seemed like a racial justice issue. And with just making an exemption, there is no protection really for that person. They have to go through the experience of being outside before they can even really truly call into question with an oversight body.
So Senator Clarkson, then we do have to move on to our next one. Are you,
We can chat afterwards about all the entire recovery are you proposing that all section 8A, B, C all be removed?
The section that says the same thing as S-186 in terms of developing things.
Yeah, that's all the same line.
That is fine, the S-186 part, it's just the exemption from landlord tenant law for text.
It's just C.
So,
Okay,
I mean,
I just-
I'm counting on Senator Clarkson, I think you started a conversation already with House Human.
Happy to talk with Teresa about this.
Okay, because
I haven't started.
they,
but-
when there is shared jurisdiction, we don't want to drop the ball on these
Yeah.
things. But this really is a better question to ask of the Human Services Committees.
And a bill that's moving, so.
Right, to me, it seems like it makes more sense in that committee as well, because it's already been, it fits better.
Right,
I agree.
okay.
Okay,
We will do that.
So
Put it in my
thank
data.
you, thanks so
Thank
much
you.
about that. And thanks for reliving all of this, to make these points that are valuable.
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so looking forward to the day I don't have to do it anymore on this one.
So I have pushed our next testimony to 11:15, so we have about 20 minutes on I think a couple issues, and I'll let Susan get in the witness chair. I'm happy to, Susan, if you want to give everyone a minute who's come on this issue to introduce themselves, because that we do want to keep it really brief, so we can get through part of this. So it sounds like there's a piece of 639 that is of importance on accessibility standards. And then there is pieces of 829 that have policy language that would steer existing dollars toward needs of people with disabilities.
Yes, I'm here for the record, Susan Aronoff. I do the policy work for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. And in the second, I'll say like just two things about that. I just want to say that I am really here to address the two policy issues that were in H 829
Okay.
and nothing that is currently in H 639. But I'd be happy to answer any questions or look at any sections of H 639. I
Well-
really just wanted to address two parts of H
So you
829.
So the Vermont Disabilities, Developmental Disabilities Council does not have a position on accessibility standards for state-funded residential construction.
To my knowledge, we were in accord with what passed the House in H 639.
Okay.
I would want to look at it in case it's been amended by anything since then.
We have so much. Okay.
Okay, but really,
Did you wanna let people introduce themselves or?
yes,
Okay.
I was gonna actually incorporate them into my testimony. which
Okay.
You don't have on the record yet, so you didn't know that, but I give
Okay.
them each special shout outs as we go forward.
Okay.
But if you would like to.
No,
Start. Yeah.
It sounds like there's a plan, so that's fine.
Thank you, and thank you so much for adding us in at this point in
Mhm.
this schedule, and we will be very efficient about this. So, I represent the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. Every time I testify publicly, I have to say this for the record. You get email from me, it says vermont.gov. I work in the Agency of Human Services. However, I work for a very special organization, Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. Every state and territory has one. We're entirely federally funded. We were created to bring the voice of people with disabilities and their family members into the places where decisions are made that impact their lives. And usually a good day for me is when Marla McQuiston from Williston or Sharon Medina and her son Christopher from Washington County and Helen Riley from Washington County would be in this chair instead of me, but we.
We have 12 bills.
They're submitting written testimony, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot Kathleen Lynch, also from Burlington.
And we have gotten a lot of emails that we read, you know, and we.
And
I haven't responded to, because Marla gets it. Haven't had a chance to respond.
and I just want to shout out this group.
You guys
This
are
group-
busy.
The Parents Developmental Disabilities Housing Initiative generated more than half the comments during the budget hearings this session about the need for the service supported housing.
Mhm.
And they are an unfunded grassroots
Mhm.
organized movement, and I'm really honored to bring their meetings
Yeah.
to you today. So going forward, I just want to say a little bit more about the council. So I am a state employee. We have a memorandum of understanding that allows me to testify on all these issues regardless of AHS's position on these same issues. So that could be on the
Everybody
budget.
should get that.
That could be,
Yeah.
I am so lucky to have that.
You are lucky to have it.
I am.
Lots of other people.
And then the other special thing about the council is by federal law, we have to be made up of a majority of people with disabilities and their family members. And one of the things we strive to do in our council is have diversity, and one form of diversity that we're very proud of is like your committee. We have council members from all of the state. So Amanda Bianchi is a young woman with a disability who lives in Swanton with her aging father. She would like housing. Krista Gadget from down in Guilford, you probably know her son Nate. She would like housing. Sharon Medina, yeah, Chris. So
Tons of
problems. So I think you've all heard the stories and have been touched, and our council really we decided we have a policy committee and a public process, and every 5 years we set our priorities, and housing. Service supported housing has risen to the top. And I want to say that Act 186, so one person I didn't introduce in the room, I'm terribly sorry, is my boss, executive.
Important for you to be able to do some of that.
She has in her hands the housing report that our council produced
Okay.
as a result of Act 186. That housing brief, there's going to be a hot link in the statement you're going to be getting from you shortly, indicated that we needed 600 units of service supported housing in the
Okay.
state.
That feels doable,
No,
right?
600 units.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that the Vermont Housing Conservation Board created 800 units in the decade after Brandon closed.
Right.
Mhm.
So
So
when
we
we
just need to keep
presented
it
this
going.
report
Yeah.
in Senate Health and Welfare last year, Chair Lyons said that we need a pipeline approach.
Yeah.
We can't do
absolutely.
this project by project, so she asked me to go back and
Mhm.
find pipelines.
Yeah,
So on the house side, we identified two
Right.
pipelines, there might be more,
right,
but we really like these two. And
Right.
the really important thing is the people who host these pipelines
Mhm.
also really like this addition also. So, and you can, there's ample testimony on the house, you can send you.
Do you
Yeah,
have a
the
notion of
first-
what section in 829 you are, because the policy
I think
discussion.
we were section 6 and 8.
That sounds right.
But I have the language, and my worthiness.
great, thank you.
So
I know.
the two pipelines.
We have it, yeah.
Yeah.
You all are a volunteer group of folks, so we appreciate you. We can find
Yeah,
something.
so the two pipelines,
Yeah.
the one that both are really exciting in their own way. The
Mhm.
Vermont Housing Improvement Program one, this would be game changing for the developers who want to bring accessible housing online.
Mhm.
One thing the house did, and I didn't go there, was they ended up bumping the amount that people would get for renovating units, so 50,000 is the amount
Mhm.
now. But if people went to a certain level of access, they'd get 70,000.
That's a perfectly fine
so
proposal.
we like
to
to
consider.
break-
In
Well,
fact, we have more
I say
money
wait-
for VHIP,
okay.
I think, than the house does right
Well,
now.
I stay away from money,
Yeah,
but I can get you that language, but I
I've
really
written
just
it
wanted
down.
to steer
We're
clear of
good.
money and
Yeah.
focus on policy, so.
and I will say that it's timely to say that because I think the policy language will travel in the budget, so.
Yeah.
I will work to get that too.
Okay, so VHIP we see as a really tremendously successful program, and it's one
We do
that
too.
attracts private. Wait, okay, so I don't need to say more about
We
that.
don't need to sell it on us,
Okay.
we sold it
Okay.
to us.
So then,
And I'm only texting to tell someone who can tell appropriations to flag that. That is the speed at which we are trying to move to accommodate things we are hearing. in
Okay,
real time.
I'm gonna go through this even faster now.
Yes.
So the other pipeline was about Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and this one I would have to say we were super excited about, as is Polly Major and other people at the Housing and Conservation Board, because they have a history of developing housing that's needed in the state,
Yes.
when and where it's needed. And if we're added to the small group of their priority populations, they have testified that they would actively be able to solicit proposals. And we've been concerned about the 3 proposals that were launched in Act 186, and we know that those projects are already actively working with the Housing and Conservation Board. So we don't feel like we need any earmarks to move them to the front of the pipeline. We think they're gonna be in good hands in the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I just want to say a little side note.
Can you say if there was a level of accessibility that met the standard for getting more VHIP money?
Yes, it was, I don't have the language in front of me, but it was something set out in an
Is it
existing
actually
statute.
in
Yeah, it's
current,
actually,
it's current language here?
I didn't, because there's different levels of accessibility.
Right.
yes.
And I think they're all in statute, so I didn't know it. I can try to
I can pull it out as soon as I get
Trying
the
to
seat.
find it.
Okay,
Alright.
so please just
Okay.
do that.
I
Yeah,
will.
So,
So the side note that I do want to say about the closing of Brandon is
Mhm.
that, so the ACB testified they created 800 units of housing in the first decade since Brandon was closed. There really hasn't been much activity since then.
Mm.
And the thing about Brandon, we closed Brandon 31 years ago. At the 10-year anniversary, there's a website, all kinds of documents. 20-year anniversary, website, speeches, documents, 30-year anniversary, which was last year, crickets. And I surmise that that's because the people who were really proud of what we had done after 10 years and 20 years are not feeling as great about where we are 30 years out. And I want to say a thing about Brandon. We all in Vermont take a lot of pride in the fact that we were the second state to close our institution. And we say that, I've said it, as if we closed our institution because it was a good idea. We closed Brandon for the same reason we eventually closed Woodstock.
Yes.
It was because the people who lived there had a lawsuit filed on their behalf. And the lawsuit that began to close Brandon was filed in 1980 by a Legal Aid Developmental Disability Law Project lawyer who was then 20-something years old, named Sally Fox.
Yeah.
So I'm here today
Channeling Sally.
standing on the shoulders of giants and asking you to keep the promises that were made by Governor Dean and the legislature back then in 1993, when Brandon was closed. And those were promises made to the families and the people here in this room, that they and their loved ones would be able to live in the communities where they're from, safely and securely. And those promises haven't been kept. And I'll send my statement. The statement documents some of the concern in the system. There was an abuse case in Franklin County that caught a lot of people's attention. The gentleman there living with four shared living provider faced criminal charges because this gentleman's weight had fluctuated between 113 and 130 pounds for a couple of years, but it decreased to 68 pounds when he was living with shared living provider. In December 2022, Medicaid fraud unit investigated the organization Upper Valley Services that serves Orange County and Morgan because of 3 incidents, including the death of a vulnerable adult. So, given the housing crisis, given the ability to rent rooms out on Airbnb, we've heard that we know that the agencies that serve people work really hard on good shared living providers, and shared living providers have provided housing for people with disabilities since the closing of Brandon. Really excellent housing in some situations, lots of situations, but there just aren't enough people willing to do that.
Yeah.
So we needed it. So in my statement, I suggest that you talk with Max Barrows and Hassan Coe. They testified in Senate Health and Welfare. They're young men. Well, not so young. Max is 38, living with his family and was
Love Max.
Love Max. He wants choice.
Yeah.
And federal law requires choice more under effective action plan because we're not providing.
Right.
So thank you so much for making time.
We
And-
still have 8 minutes, so.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
Yeah, do you, yeah.
I yield my time
Oh,
to
Susan, why don't you just stay in the seat, because other people may wanna answer questions or have comments. Senator Clarkson is
So
in the
the
seat.
Being that we're
Yeah.
not covered and we're hoping to cover further.
So so the VHIP language in section 7 of 829, which is the intent to steer dollars toward housing that is supportive for communities.
For BHCB.
That's what she knows that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just wanted to get, okay, I wanted to, and you can comment on it. There are 2 pieces that we need to see if the intent right now is to move them in the budget, or we are adding them to the housing bill. So it's not a make or break question today, but I do think Senator Kitchell is very sympathetic to this issue and wants to move these pieces as where she can, and wants next year to be finding more money for, like a heartbeat type of situation. So could someone also answer, was there like a $10 million that is put forth for our consideration to help fund a new cluster I don't know what the.
Yeah, so we did put
Yeah.
forth,
Yeah,
Marlon, we did put forth a request for 10.82 or something.
mhm,
To be split between the 3 projects that were funded through the planning was funded through Act 186.
mhm,
We have since decided that since there is such a
Tight budget.
tight budget, that we will settle for getting the pipeline set up so that those projects can be funded in the future. And
Right.
Vermont Housing Conservation Board is happy to put funds.
great.
So,
Great, and I mean, we do wanna know the specific amounts because we can't make a promise for FY 26. But this certainly will be on our minds, going into next year's budget discussions, which is easier for us to plan for than trying to, get something right
You
now.
already alluded to it, that we would spend some time this fall if we're all lucky enough to get reelected.
Yeah.
To really prioritize
Okay.
coming up with a
Yes.
funding pipeline. But my question is, this I think we've got covered, but the VHCB, when you say Poly Major wants us to add. The VHCB could add this now. What do they need us for? They don't need us to do this policy change, I don't think, and that's my question.
My understanding is that that group that people with Medicaid funded services, disabilities would be added to is existing priority language for VHCP.
Okay.
I think so too.
And that's where they say, if we were added to that group of priorities, so it's housing for refugees, housing for farm workers, and then housing, service supported housing for
Yeah,
people receiving Medicaid, that if we were
I think
added-
it's time to set that
Those
intention in statute. I
priority-
don't.
Yeah.
And she said
Yeah, I don't
that
see
would
problem.
enable them,
Yeah.
now they can respond, this is how she explained it to me, and I think also testified. Because we wanted to be moved to the top of the pipeline, but anyway, she said, right now, they can respond to proposals.
Mhm.
And that's as good as it gets,
Mhm.
but she thought that if this language were changed, that then they could actively solicit proposals. And
Mhm.
they could ask the projects they're working with
Yeah,
to create something, or in an existing project, do what they're doing in Waterbury
yeah,
and in Burlington, which is add 3 units or set aside work with
Sure.
those service providers
Yeah.
and designate units.
I will just say, if we knew that was a barrier before, we would have fixed that a long time ago, so I am sorry that it's taken this long.
I agree, and I think we could just add, I mean, right here it says to fund permanent supportive housing, I would say add permanent service supportive housing.
Yes, that'd be great,
Yeah. Add that.
Okay, we have like one thing going at a time, but I'm sure we can do that.
Well, or do it after.
Yeah, yeah,
I
but I
want to
do,
make 2 points.
and can you remind me?
My name is Ellen Ryan, I'm from Warrenton, I'm Washington County.
Okay,
So, 2 points, shared living providers, there are very successful ones.
Mhm.
But the people who take care of them are not gonna be taking care of our children who are in our 20s and 30s
Mhm.
when they're 60 or 70. So those placements are gonna continually change over. The older an individual with differences get, they're not disabled, they're just different, they have abilities, the harder that transition and the more repercussions you're going to have. So that in itself is a huge issue. People who have their children in placement for 30 years, love it. Well, guess what? Your child isn't always gonna be in that house,
Mhm.
and you're not gonna be here
Mhm.
for that transition.
We're gonna have a transition in a few minutes, if you
Yeah.
wanna be in the hall, you can, we'll come find you, we're gonna stay here.
My second issue with all this, my son is 26. You're talking 5, 6 years, he's gonna be 30, 31, 32, 35 before you get him a place to live. It's not okay. This has to move and it has to move now. You have a whole population of individuals coming up the pipeline. There are 600 people that you know about.
Mhm.
How many others in the state of Vermont that you don't know about that are
Right.
living with 80 and 70-year-old parents?
Yes,
This has to move.
yes,
Senate and House has to get together and make this happen.
yeah.
They're your future homeless population.
Sure. And what I do wanna say, again, cause I don't think most of the people in the room were here for this, but in FY 25, we now have more money in the Senate budget for VHCB and for these structural housing priorities. We cannot in good faith promise you anything in FY 26, but just know it's a priority. I mean, I can't responsibly do that because we don't have control over FY 26 budget. But we could put this policy language in and we can hear you now about 3 very discrete and specific projects that you need $10 million for as we look toward next year's budget. And we start planning for next year's budget right now.
Kirsten Murphy, Executive Director of Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, just to speak to those 3 really important projects in the
Yeah.
pipeline. Number 1, they were created in order to be scalable, to
Yeah.
be models for other opportunities.
Mhm.
Number 2, it is very concerning to us in the council, that those planning grants were written into a plan of corrections from federal Medicaid authority with AHS. But there was no effort to fund litigation of
Mhm.
these things. And really, that,
Yeah,
you don't create choice by planning for it.
right.
You create.
And
filter.
those plans need to move or all that work is lost. Precisely, yeah.
And you're still under Medicaid non-compliance.
Right, absolutely.
Yes, we're
Lose
still,
all your
yes,
funding.
right.
we have been.
You,
for a
I will
while.
also say, you were talking to the committee that wants housing choice for everyone.
Exactly.
We have Vermont Housing Finance Agency and our Department of Housing and Community Development saying we need 7,000 new units of housing each year to give everyone housing choice. So 600 is not a lot to ask if we reduce barriers to building housing. So this is definitely a both and. We don't not care about money. We're just appropriating more money in FY 25 for housing than the House right now. And then we will be having a conversation about FY 26.
Madam Chair.
I do see someone else who hasn't spoken to my.
Hi,
Yeah.
Sharon Medine, I'm from Berry, Washington County. Yeah, my son Chris is 42 years old. The only home he's ever known is with me. His daughter lives in New York, his sister lives in New York. And not only am I praying for this housing to go through so that my son has a safe and secure place to live when I pass. I'm 71 years old. Who knows what's gonna happen tomorrow?
Yeah.
But the other issue that ties into this is the issue of the housing being service supported.
Yes.
My son has not had any of his home and
Yeah.
community-based services for the last 4 years.
Right.
So he lost his job, he lost his job coach, he lost his home and community-based trained person, he
Mhm.
lost everything.
Mhm.
And nothing has changed in the past
So
4 years.
is that because of COVID?
Well, it kind of started that way, but then the whole issue of,
Never got reinstated.
yeah, staff who are providing services, need to have a level of training.
And a livable wage.
Yeah.
Yes,
That was gonna
So
be my
as we look at our budget, that is a huge priority of Senator Kitchell. So I think we're just trying to reiterate to people that everything is a priority, and within that, we do have to bring the cost of housing down as we work to fund it. It is not responsible to any of you or to the rest of Vermont taxpayers to fund only the most expensive units of housing. And right now with our current regulatory framework and the way nonprofits meet the standards of that regulatory framework, our housing is more expensive than it should be. Senator Sher.
So, there's an organization called L'Arche,
Yes.
we're in my area, and it's parents who are having this, this horrible situation, and, they're doing something on their own, it's a private organization. So a concern I have with any situation like this, you have to make sure that it's quality and that the people are treated appropriately and that you have good trained folks there, and it's a long-term commitment. So we don't have really great track record of that.
Mhm.
So and it's hard as
Yeah.
as a state, as
Right.
a government to do
Right.
that. So I'd be interested in just exploring ways to have the parent organization work with the state ongoing, just to have quality ensured, because that's really an issue.
Is there anything you wanted to?
I'm just happy to chat with you all after
Okay.
this, but yes, there has been a consistent coming through Teresa Wood's committee,
Okay,
a bearing down on the issues of quality
Mhm.
and checking and checks and balances.
Mhm.
There is a lot more work to do.
right.
But
Yes.
you are correct, and it's certainly the advocates are very concerned about
But
that.
yeah, so and that might be a way to find more funding too, because there might be other funding mechanisms, and that would.
More of a public-private partnership.
Right, so
Mhm.
I'm just interested in talking about that.
That's great. I'm interested
Considering
in
that.
all the conversations we
And
can
next
have
year,
here with.
yeah, but it's really important that we get it right, because otherwise we're just gonna have another
We are
problem.
100% behind getting it right.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
No one has asked me about why the language is for people with disabilities who receive Medicaid funded home and community-based
Mhm.
services. And the reason why it's that particular group of people with disabilities is because exactly some of the checks and balances that Senator Harris is talking about. Because Medicaid CMS has certain rules. We are not in compliance with them right now, but we will be. And so the projects that we're looking for public funding on are the ones that would need the quality measures to get Medicaid
Yeah.
so that people with Medicaid would be able to live there. Medicaid won't provide home community-based services in spaces that don't meet their standards.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that's
So
why
That
that.
language is in here, it's not, doesn't say service supported housing, but it does say, and housing available to foreign workers, refugees, and or individuals with disabilities who are eligible to receive Medicaid funded home and community-based services.
Right.
That is the language you
Yeah.
want indeed
Yes.
in the VHCD language.
And that's the,
Right.
the group that
Mhm.
housing people.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes, and one thing, and you guys understand this far better than I do, is that people will, with disabilities, people with certain challenges will be far more successful in maintaining their housing if they have services.
Mhm.
And so that it's so critical to have that link between services and housing at the start, and that's why the planning grants have to have services baked in. And
Yeah,
what the housing providers like is to have people who come with services.
yeah.
So.
And I think you know more about that at least than I do. Don't tell yourself
Well, and as, you know, as we end, I mean, we have next steps, you will see this language, there's commitment outside of this room to that as well. You will see it in some bill that is moving.
And we can get you the numbers. We have
Yeah.
the numbers for the 10 million. Where did that
Well,
come
yeah,
from?
no, I mean, that is helpful for our ongoing conversation.
I'm also interested in how many people don't fit into that picture. Do you have any sense of that? How many people are still gonna be left out?
So there's
Yeah.
17,000 people in Vermont that have some sort of disability.
And of those
Probably
that
only
are covered by
medical,
Medicare?
HCBS is probably only covering about 8. And then some of them don't necessarily need housing.
Covering 8 people?
8,000.
8,000.
Okay, okay.
8,000
I would be surprised if you said 8 people, honestly, but okay, that's better than, yeah, I thought.
Where would we get statistics that would just inform us a little bit better?
The annual reports from the
Which you-
Choices for Care program and the
From-
program called, the
Choices for change.
Choices for Care program, or people, some of people have physical disabilities in that program. And then also the annual report for folks receiving developmental disability services. Estimating the overall number of people in Vermont with a disability is a difficult thing because there's a lot of subcategories of disability, right? But certainly the people who qualify for home and community-based services are folks with significant support needs. And really not by any means the whole of the community experience, even if there's this way.
I'll just say, you know, many of us around this table have some experience with this in our lives. I mean, my mother is looking at houses to move here from California. My sister is trying to get back on her SSDI and, you know, figure out her independence. But we get what you're saying. It's not, you know, lost on us. And my mother's 70, sister's 42. You know, it's real for people that, you know, they need options and you all deserve to have some opportunity to have less stress in your lives as you know, try and find permanent housing for your kids. So we hear you and we get it. And, you know, we don't want to make any promises we can't keep. And it's been really helpful for us to keep an eye on this. 2 of us share a house with Senator Lyon, so and she cares about this, and she's on appropriations with Senator Kitchell, who cares about this.
We all care about it.
Yeah,
We all
we wanted a
represent
specific amount
population.
of
We all
money.
represent
We will have you back early next session to talk about the 10.2 million and how to make that a priority in the FY26 budget.
And that's, I believe like once to say something, I also just want to say that Ellen Riley, when she told me part of her story.
Yeah.
Her story is so compelling and she submitted a written statement,
Okay.
like the things that her and her husband had to do to buy a house and their mortgage, their retirement, and it's just one person's story. But what I have found working with the group in this story is one person's story will tell you kind of everything you need to know.
Is
about
that
this
on our,
situation.
is that?
Yeah, I think she submitted it.
in your category.
Can you grant?
I'm gonna submit
I
it.
have one from February 15th.
Okay.
And I sent Senator Cummings rewritten to be appropriate to what's happening
Okay,
last night.
is that the one you think we have?
I received 3 yet.
Okay.
I think you
We're
have
doing
the
the
one
most
from
recent.
today,
And-
you'd have to go back to the file,
Yes.
or I can send it. to
No,
you.
no,
It's on
it
my
looks like we have it
computer.
and we're gonna print some from here so we can read that.
And Kathleen Lynch is sitting behind you, wanted to just, might have also submitted a statement, but she wanted to just say something, sure.
I did forward coming from last year pertaining to the budget for Medicaid increase, so it's still relevant to today. So I did submit that this week, but again, Kathleen Lynch, my husband Tex and I have raised our 7 kids on Apple Tree Point in Burlington with Senator Gulick, Representative Odie, Bill Baruch, who I just spoke with on our behalf here. But I just want to say, prior to being a mom of all our kids, I'm a surgical nurse. I'm still proud surgical nurse at the hospital, 47 years, and I have high regard for human life. All of our children and families that we've come so close to, Ellen, Marla. We have just worked really hard, I think, raising these kids, and now we are at a natural point where they are aging, we are aging. We're all saying the same, expressing the same needs, but I see in particular at the hospital, on any given day, we have 60 to 80 people in hospital beds who do not need to be there. They need long-term housing. And I consider our chapter in this group, people that are aging, want to stay in Vermont, deserve high quality care in Vermont. And I just see that we have such a large issue we have to try and solve related to housing for our vulnerable adults, regardless of the condition or diagnosis somebody has. And I want to just add a positive comment for the Converse home in Burlington, where my mother lived. I've expressed this to a number of legislators. When mom developed Alzheimer's, she had lived in our neighborhood beautifully in her retirement and then needed supervision. And over the 4 years she was there, I had to go visit there. And I thought he could thrive in this environment. It's just if you need a model, I just want to encourage anyone thinking of housing, safe, secure, supportive, professional. I mean, their language, every staff member was just so beautiful working with mom. I could see Patrick doing very well in an environment like that. You know, I preferably to a small home setting or a shared provider that may also not be able to care for him the next day and have him, you know, subject to moving. I want to see him in a safe, stable, organized setting that has loving care, and all the amenities are met for anyone living in that beautiful place. And I never knew about it till it was our turn to look for that kind of care. So I would suggest if anyone is in search of a location that supports people with or without disabilities. By the way, a lot of people will retire, sell their home, they don't need their car anymore, they want to live downtown Burlington, walk to the Flynn. They look at Converse Home as a beautiful option.
Converse or Converse?
The Converse Home, it's been there for over 150 years. And they, within the Converse Home, they have a memory unit, which I see as a safe model for our chapter. I would have complete confidence it would be safe there. So I just wanted to mention.
Thank you.
As a concerned mom. Yeah. In our end.
Yeah.
And thank you for everybody's efforts around the table.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. We'll talk to the HCB more because money could be allocated from their perspective to start seeding the permitting process and the location citing and things that are concrete while we look for this, 10.82 million, and that wouldn't put us behind anything you've heard about the funding path that's ahead of us. Again, we just can't make any promises, but you're talking to Senator Baruch, Senator Kitchell, Senator Lyons, us. That's the group of people who are going to try and put this on a path for 2026. So
Because the HCB is going to be reasonably well funded this year, and if we can get this language in to give them a jump start on this anyway.
yeah, so
that.
we hear you.
And
Bill numbers to me are like the worst thing at this time of year because we just have to be talking about the ideas, the policies, and the budget planning. I don't want people to feel like they're lost if one particular budget number falls by the wayside. The language lives on, the intention lives on. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we get right now?
Yep, we can.
That's just for, so good to see you here.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I bring it straight to them right now, disability housing will start next session.
Oh, what am I talking about?
Actually, it's not responsible.
Yeah,
I know, I
and
just
know
did that.
it's not, but it just seemed like we should discuss it.
So I go out.
Okay.
One or two.
Oh, okay.
Right, try a different lunch, right?
Yeah, I just. Okay.
Yeah, but it's also.
Okay, okay. Yeah, and that's reasonable, but we gotta make sure the long term is gonna be like financially stable and nice. Stable and nice.
Right, you can't make that to get, you can make it good, why would have that language that we're gonna do? Really nice, okay, so we're gonna.
Take care of it.
Yes,
How are you doing? I read nothing that you have sent.
I didn't do much.
Because
There's a.
I know I'm not trying to.
If you wanna get a little bit into it, we're still live. We're doing now.
I read
that.
that.
Okay, so Rick, yeah, if you wanna share your screen and show us some language changes that we've made in trying to, and I have a proposed language change. But I have floated with the committee out loud, I think, but
It's in here,
you have it.
yeah, where do you wanna see it? Sure.
And if someone can close the door. So while Rick is getting that started, I think people know we still have tough road ahead. With whatever we propose moving forward, we are going to have to look at ways to accommodate some of the concerns that have been raised by the auditor that get raised in appropriations. We are looking for the latest fiscal note on veggie that might be available. We're asking JFO for that now, if there was a fiscal note for H10. So we'll see if that's something that will be helpful to other communities as we move forward, but I'm glad we have Kathy here and Dita, because I want us to talk about, how this program might work, and we have some potential language changes.
Oh, we do have
yes.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Rick Stagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. Just to circle back then here on the fiscal note, you may remember that 247, one of the reasons it didn't get too far was because the fiscal note wasn't present. So you would want a fiscal note on that if you would want appropriations to consider the forgivable loan track, just as a reminder to the committee. So section 1, no changes, the repeal of the sunset. This would allow veggie to live on indefinitely. No changes. Section 2, this is where H10 begun. You recall, we changed members from 11 to 9. One thing
Senator Harrison, have you been?
We met yesterday,
unchanged.
so I think.
But I do want to talk about one thing. There was discussion about these members being legislative members specifically. They can be, but they don't have to be. Previously, B and C here, these were members, one of the House, one of the Senate. Senator Harrison on a call yesterday discussed with some ACCD members the possibility of changing the members to legislative members.
Or at least one.
Or adding
Yeah,
one.
legislative. I don't know why they weren't.
So we're not ready for a vote today, probably.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So we're
We
shifting
do
this.
need to work on this
Yeah.
and.
It's,
finish it up.
but I think we have plenty for the committee to talk about.
Do you want opinions on, because
Yes.
basically we heard Vepsi come in and say, there's a lot of these things that they don't like. And I said to Harrison, it's like kind of on your shoulders to manage, what your belief about the merit of these.
Yeah,
So point out where you want our opinions.
and I probably should have gotten more information from the House, because I don't know the purpose of having 2 members appointed,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously it's to have more legislative members or
Mhm.
for more members appointed by the legislature. But I don't know why it didn't specify that they be members. And my guess is that they wanted some flexibility, so they can be
Mhm.
members or not.
Right.
And I.
Were you looking at like one who is a member of the legislative body and then one who's appointed who may or may not be, like, do you have?
Yes, I mean, that would be
Okay.
my preference.
And do you have a opinion right now on going to 9 members?
I don't think it's a problem.
Okay, that's, except they don't. want
Except
that.
we're reducing members. I would rather go up rather than down.
Okay.
From what I know now, I think I've had all of 2
Okay.
meetings, 1 meeting. The members do seem, very solid and
Mhm.
representative of the.
So you
area.
might add 2 members and make it 13, or keep the 11 and by attrition, make 2 more legislative appointments, what?
I would do 13.
Okay, does the committee have opinions about this? Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm confused here, because we have so many crossouts and I'm trying to
Mhm.
work with this and this. So are we looking at 2 members appointed by the speaker or by the pro tem, one of which should be a legislator?
I would actually leave it as it is
Flexible.
now, because there's
That I think
likely
we heard-
a
They can
reason.
do, it doesn't specify, they can do 2 legislators, or if there's somebody outside they'd really like to put on, but they can do that.
Well, I think we heard that it's really critical for them to always have 2 legislative members.
Okay, so then we need to say it, but I think we need to say.
So
If you want that, that's fine. I'm
Okay.
agnostic on that.
I think, it sounds like we're moving toward we need to start drafting.
Yeah,
is my
yeah,
only thing, so,
Right.
we need this done. So it sounds like our committee's moving toward 13 members. Adding 2 more and making sure one is a member of the House, one is a member of the Senate. And then however you wanna phrase it in the same sentence or another sentence, that additionally. Like, if they're appointing 2 members, one must be a legislator. But
Yes.
So you're keeping 9 appointed by the governor, and
no,
then 2,
I'm looking at the top where it says 9 voting members.
right, but
So-
if you're, currently there's 13, right? So you wanna add.
I thought
two-
No, currently there's 11.
Sorry, currently
Okay.
there's 11.
Yeah.
You wanna make it 13.
That's a question.
Why take it up to 30?
Because
That's-
that's the
because
question.
that's where the additional people, one from the House and one from the Senate, who are not members of the House or Senate. Get.
The
be there.
question becomes, I think the other middle ground would be through attrition. There are 2 less governor appointees, and when they cycle off, there is an additional appointee made by the House and the Senate, so that then you're not kicking anyone off. Does that sound like people would rather have 11 than 13? We need to make decisions.
I think 13 is fine.
I need to know from everybody. It
Okay.
sounds like there's discomfort. with
Okay, it would-
13.
I don't,
Okay, so
What does the committee want?
what Jessica, what's your thought?
I think we
You're the
should,
pro here.
I mean, I've been to as many, I've been to 4 meetings, but I think in terms of talking to other committee members, and actually polling the council at the last, council meeting we had, they were very clear that they wanted to keep it at 11. And that it is really, really important that there be actual legislative members
Okay.
on the committee.
So the compromise position with the House would be then to give the 2 members, make sure one is the legislator from each. And as 2 governor appointees cycle off, they would be replaced with a new House and Senate appointee. That we're gonna move on now.
Okay.
So
And we should-
essentially, you've got 5 members at this point, based on what you're proposing. You've got how many members appointed by the?
7 but appointed by the governor over time,
7 appointed by the governor, and then,
4 appointed by the legislature.
all right, and
No, then there are
And
2
of
additional
those-
regional members.
legislative members is the intent that each of those members appointed
Oh, so
by
it's
the
5.
legislator be legislators.
Yeah.
It's at least one of the 2.
So, sorry, there are more members further down in 2.
I see that. But I'm saying, what's the
Those are
intent?
not part of the council.
They're
What's
not
the
voting.
intent that you wanna have at the end? You wanna have 5 people appointed by the governor Right. You wanna have 4 people appointed by the legislature. Now, of those 4, how many do you want to be legislators?
2.
And is it desirable to have 2 people who are legislators, or is it desirable to have 4 people who are legislators?
2.
Now, you're saying 4.
I think it would make sense if you're gonna, through attrition, reduce the number of executive branch appointees. In order to make sure that there is transparency, that legislators are understanding the process, that it would make sense to have 4 legislative members so that we can minimize whatever distrust that we.
Okay. So where are we getting those other 2? The good point was made, there's 5 gubernatorial and 2 regional.
No, they're non-voting.
Oh, so okay, then let's not,
That was my
okay, so let's move on now.
So 9, 5 from the governor, 4.
No, 11.
11,
7 from the
7
governor,
from the governor.
4 from the
yes,
legislature. I really
And
think.
2 were attrition.
right, they had reduced it to 5 in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, we'll talk about this.
Okay, I don't know what we're gonna have time for today,
Yeah.
we need to be in a different place with this bill. If we're gonna move it, so,
Oh, we're good, I think.
well, we have very little time, so.
Okay, moving on. This, I'm going to, I changed this based on the previous subsection changing, the governor's appointment, so this will revert back to the original language. The governor will, and this won't even apply. Long story short, don't worry about C1. C1 will revert to its original language.
Okay.
Yeah, section 3 above that though, there's a requirement that the replacement has to be appointed no later than 30 days after receiving notice. I think that's impossible.
How many days do you?
That's only 1 month.
I just, I
Does it
mean, 90, I don't know, do we
Okay.
have that in other things?
Do you have a number of days that you feel is workable?
I mean, I think it should be as soon as possible. The issue had been with legislative members, the delay in legislative members.
Right, it's our fault, that's all we
Right,
have.
and it
But
was a 2-year delay in a legislative member from the Senate being
That's
appointed.
right,
Oh,
they did,
well,
until when.
really our fault.
Oh,
So
the
this
legislative
is
member
the
of the Senate is not appointed within 30 days, the pro tem has to serve.
You know what, that's a great idea.
That's a good.
Yeah,
Um,
it's, you just can't force people to appoint a.
Well, there's no force here anyway.
Other than-
I'm totally shooting from the hip here, otherwise we have to like pick a number of days. But could we just say if they don't appoint, that position gets reverted back to, you can't do that. Then
No.
Then let's say
Say 90.
90 days, and apparently the Senate needs to have a conversation about this being our
Let's
fault.
say we
Yeah.
are not in session,
But
so if somebody leaves
Right.
May 12th and we go home on the 10th, we're not back in session to appoint anyone
Right.
until January.
But
Okay,
maybe
so why not-
committees can gather and do that, that is.
You
All right,
might
let's just
then
say
maybe
90
add
days.
something that says 90 days, or the next time a legislative body can make a
That's-
appointment.
yeah.
It's really our fault.
If we do
There we-
90 days, if the speaker can appoint
Right.
and.
Yeah, clearly we're just,
So just say 90 days.
okay.
Okay, then let me confirm. So it is,
Yeah.
it is 30 days, within 30 days notice, provide notice, okay? Then 90 days after that notice, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, we have on page 4, we have the ethics language.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on, there's no changes here.
Okay,
I believe actually,
do
yeah,
you,
no changes here.
had you had a problem with this?
I don't think it's necessary. I think it's
Okay.
duplicative. I asked that it be struck.
Okay,
The executive branch has,
We have our own ethics code, state code of ethics that, and it.
That they fall under.
As in code of ethics, we don't need anything about ethics in any bill
No.
now.
okay,
I say just comply.
with the state code of ethics.
Gubernatorial code.
Is
We
there,
went through this at VSAC yesterday, and all
The
the privacy things we are
administration.
under
okay,
are ethics.
which code of ethics are you on?
we're under the executive branch code of.
So just, we're making reference that the council is under the executive.
Is the council or are those legislative members under the ethics code of the House and the Senate? That's typically the way we've done it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and
Houses.
not under the,
So this is, we might not, should we strike this language?
Yes, I think it's
Okay,
easier to strike it because that is all understood.
So Rick, you have a, right,
On the new language.
yeah,
What about B, executive session? Also, let's consider B here,
Yeah.
which is I think you can strike B too. If you're okay with applying, just adhering to the state good fact, I think you can strike B. But
Yeah, I think we're okay with disclosure, I
Right.
suppose. I mean, is
B,
that required under the code of
Yes.
ethics?
Yes.
If it's required under the
Let's
code of
strike
ethics,
it.
we can strike it.
I had strike your question mark, and I would go strike your exclamation point.
what about 5?
Five is a tough one. And
So
there's obviously
you had
history.
asked for the to be struck because it's a very specific person
Right.
that's being asked to be present.
And it's contrary to the rules of the open meeting. So we're basically asking what this statute is doing is restricting Pepsi as a public body's rights under the open meeting law. And would be requiring someone that is not a member of the council to be a part of an executive session. And so for that reason, we don't think that it's, we don't believe that there should be a restriction to our open meeting law. In you're setting a potential precedent for.
And you're not hostile to the state economist.
We're not hostile to him. No, I just met with him today about the Remy model,
Right,
actually.
right. I don't know what's about this.
It's
Well,
the governor's,
Yeah.
Exactly.
not the legislative.
Right.
Right, so I don't know what problem
Well,
we're solving.
evidently, there was a problem where the economist did want to be in the executive session. He was excluded from it. Given that though, I don't think this is the right kind of thing that should be in statute.
Okay.
I mean, but it is indicative of a lack of trust.
Well, was there a lack of trust that caused this construction in the first place? Why
Yeah,
is this,
no,
why
there
does
was-
anybody know why this was constructed in this way?
I have no idea.
You weren't here, right,
Was
when the
not.
economist was excluded. Do we know like what year this happened? Was it? Okay, then it sounds like
It
people
was
want to.
fairly recently because the Economist only got involved when there was questions about the Remy model.
Okay.
That was maybe 4 years ago. It was
Okay.
determined that the state economist would run the Remy model.
Right.
It was state employees
So,
and it was.
Oh, right, and there were
So
issues.
Issues. and
Yeah,
it was
someone-
high.
so
Random.
is there some kind of medium language that's like the council shall make the accommodations necessary for the state economist to,
Auditor.
No, I think I would just strike the whole.
okay, so.
I think the council, this is relevant, but it's not in here, it needs its own attorney. The council doesn't have an attorney, the council uses ACCD's attorney. But the attorney does not directly.
That's an appropriation we can look at next year.
Yeah,
We don't
well,
have any
they're
money.
already paying the person to do
They're
it.
paying an,
You're paying
for the
an attorney, but the
But the
attorney
attorney's-
is not their
And that
specific attorney.
attorney is independent, right?
No,
Many
it's-
things have.
Yeah, I don't think we have time to
Deputy-
contemplate a new configuration right now.
No, and that's-
So it
Given our
sounds like people
previous
want to
Not-
strike
Yeah,
this
not a deputy.
section.
Right.
I think the reason, my suspicion is that the reason the economist is in there is to provide an oversight function so that the council doesn't in fact make an award that is inconsistent with what the model and the things related to the model have to do. That's my suspicion as to why that person is there. It's there to look over the council.
Do you want to address that?
Yeah, so I talked to the chair and the economist this morning, and my understanding is that the economist attends the executive session typically when the initial application is presented in executive session, because that is the time when the potential incentive to be earned is calculated. At the time of the final, the incentive has already been calculated. They're not going back and redoing the cost benefit model. They're just evaluating the performance, whether there needs to be any adjustments to the performance measurements, before signing off on a final application. So the need for the economist to be in the room, frankly, is really important in the initial, but not necessarily in the final. So again, I think open meeting law is really clear that the council can decide who gets to be in the room. For those reasons, I think we should just strike this language and leave it up to the council and their members to decide when it's appropriate for who to be in the room, because the lawyer can be in executive session, the
Okay.
clerical assistants can be in executive session.
What is people's,
Is there a situation in which, though, the council during these subsequent meetings can discuss the reasons why the award ought to be granted because of things that the potential awardee has told the council? Or is this all complete accurate, and are you simply doing checking of what actually has occurred and nothing more than that at those meetings?
I do not know the answer to that question, Senator, because I have not completed a final application yet. But Commissioner Gold.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the final is when, if they get initially approved, it's based on a particular projection of what their project is going to be. Then once they start getting estimates and things for their project, they have the opportunity to come back for a final so that they could cement the targets based on their final plans. So it's not like a reworking.
So theoretically, the economists could disagree with what they say.
Well, in many cases, the economist has run the model. So he already.
Right, so the Remy model's already been run.
The model is based on the input that.
Correct.
The awardee, the person to be awarded has given them, and could that change in a subsequent meeting?
He would do another run of the model based on.
But he would not be present at the meeting?
He could be.
He could be at the
Or he
meeting.
might not be.
He may be, if I would imagine that based on what I know of the council and of the council members, that if there were substantial changes made to the Remy model, that they would absolutely be inviting the economist into the executive session. The problem with this language is that you are making a requirement, which is essentially changing the open meeting law, which allows for the council to have that discretion.
So I have to ask, see, this bill is now kind of missing the budget train. We can continue this conversation and come here on Thursday at 8 a.m. for a half an hour to vote on the bill. But I think otherwise it's effectively a dead bill anyway, unless we act more quickly than we are ready to right now. The other committees need to consider this. And they're gonna run out of time and patience to do that.
When is the deadline for that?
I mean, I don't know, but we have 2 more weeks as committees, yeah.
But
Well, the budget then will be in the.
But
I'm just saying, I'm trying to move this along because this is gonna be.
yeah, I think we could move along without problem, but do away with the sunset. I think it's pretty obvious that there's some distrust given this. Adding the new loan program would be a major tax expense. It's foregone revenue. I don't think this year that would make it through just.
Well, I would like to get to the proposal I'm putting on the table, which the whole program is a Hail Mary. I do like the program. I think it works better for small businesses who are staying in the state. And so I asked Rick to draft something that says that all of those dollars would go to flood impacted businesses.
Just for fiscal year 25?
Yes, for fiscal year 25.
And do you think that will help this get through?
I don't know, but
I think
it's a responsible thing for us to do because we're not helping businesses with more funds.
I think that might be acceptable. It's limited in its scope. We know that those businesses are still struggling. And that might make it through, and it would be a good testing ground.
Right.
It would show what the take up was.
Right.
I'm still concerned that we make sure that VEDA gets its money back. Yes, because I'm not sure.
So, and that's where I would like to turn to Cassie and probably the Commissioner Bolio, because I just want to make sure I understand. We could set a forgivable loan program in motion and you have interest that you would put into the program that is not booked in the budget for another purpose right now.
Yeah, I'm just reading this for the first time.
Yes,
For you.
the whole committee is, and I wish we had gotten to it sooner.
So,
So we'll come back to it, but.
yeah. The piece that's important to realize, and you hit the nail on the head, is this is VEDA money that we would in theory dole out. as a loan, but really it's a grant.
I
And
mean, we know that some don't meet the terms, you know,
Right.
so they have to treat it as a loan until it's.
so there's some terminology in here that's broad. And I would want to understand the terms of meeting forgiveness.
Yeah.
So what does lost revenues mean? You know, and how do you meet that criteria? Who's gonna make that determination?
So-
And how is tax gonna get involved?
This
in
was
that?
a start that I hoped we'd be able to get you in the witness chair and talk about this more. I do think we'll need to get here at 8 a.m. on Thursday if we're gonna finish this. So I could work with you on this language and with Rick, if the rest of the committee is okay with us moving in this direction. We are already meeting at 8:30. So,
We're going maybe for a little bit of lunch instead.
Yeah,
does,
stay at lunch.
I'll just flag on Thursdays for the future trust.
right, so I was gonna announce that I've asked, the Pew Charitable Trust was gonna be in New Hampshire. They do a lot of research on housing and homelessness, so they're gonna present here at lunch on Thursday, the 18th.
To the whole body or just to us?
We're inviting the chamber, the whole 2 chambers, we're inviting the 100 community members.
So in the House chamber at lunch.
We're looking at the
Billion.
Oh, that,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not required that anybody come, but I can't do Thursday lunch.
Could we do Wednesday lunch?
So we're just gonna have to find a half an hour. Would people rather find lunch than
Yes.
morning?
Yes.
So. Either, okay. So this was the big change to consider today. This would be the entirety of the forgivable loan program for 2025.
And
Yes,
it's
it's
320,000, can you get the,
I know that that's
350,000,
issue
so that would be
with.
for you.
For low
Yeah.
cost,
Yes,
alright,
right, so I just wanna make sure they understand that.
yeah,
Tax money to pay off the business losses.
Right.
Right, so we can take out, yeah,
Could have a lot of ramifications.
right.
So, you know, how do you make up? Yeah, you get a loan, how are you gonna make up your business losses that
Yeah.
way?
so this is
yeah.
a different model
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had wanted to start with just language to look at, but that it's about people rehiring or making a capital investment after the flood, that it's not just as broad as it's flood relief money. So we will work on narrowing this back to kind of what the overall intent in the future is of the forgivable loan program, to still focus on hiring and capital improvement. But still focus these dollars solely on flood.
Yeah.
So physical or structural damage,
Right,
to me, that replaces capital investment.
but,
Losses of revenue, we probably won't.
but we need to just be clear that,
Yeah.
go back, please, Rick, go back farther, the 350,000. That is an appropriation, and that would go to VITA to be their reserve for the
Mhm.
loss.
Losses, but right, it wouldn't.
So
fund
just so
the
everybody
loan.
knows that.
Yes, it's your risk
We're
management.
still reliant on, I guess, the tax department to pay us back. So
Mhm.
that's
Right.
kind of a tricky one because this is on flood related damages versus increased people.
Right.
Right, so it's like
So
an
any
increase
should be
from a
different.
decrease.
Well, it's
exactly.
eligibility. They would still have to be able, they would still have to go through the application process.
So
Right,
they have
right.
to
And
be
this may
eligible
be
for
a
vesting.
yearly.
Right, no, for the
Huh.
municipal loan
This
program.
may be a year.
Okay.
This is that have suffered these flooding
Well, a
events,
lot of
they're
them
eligible
are
to apply.
scratched.
So it's not connected
But
to.
that's what.
It's connected to the forgivable loan program, which I don't know if you call it veg or not, but it's.
Okay.
I guess what I would
Just
say
forgivable loan.
in the
That's,
2 minutes we have is, I think the forgivable loan program will die. Unless we try and see, and I really like to take money that's currently not, being circulated in the economy and get it to our flood impacted businesses as a pilot for this program and figure out what the parameters are that make this meet the standards you need it to
Probably should let VITA tell us what parameters they need.
Mhm.
I mean, they have regulations, they're a
Right.
banking institution.
Right.
Yeah.
So if people are okay with that by Thursday.
I do have other people sort of to, like Mike Peachack and the state treasurer who
Uh-huh.
is on my board.
Yes.
But at the same time, we do want to find a way to help, and that's why I'm here with the VEPSI program as well, which is not the same mission
Mm-hmm.
that we do right now.
Mhm.
Our mission is access to capital, providing that gap in financing.
Right.
This program is an incentive program, so
Right.
it is different.
We could
but we
also
are-
just say, like, we could save the language of the program and just say only flood impacted downtowns are eligible. I mean, basically what we're hearing is they are all struggling, you know.
So here's the thing, so it's very, what
Yeah.
this is very similar to what we did with an appropriation from the state for 18.5 million to basically grant out money for businesses that didn't get enough from the federal relief programs from COVID.
Exactly.
It was state money, the forgiveness process was very easy. Like,
Yeah.
give us your operating expenses,
Right.
show us that you use that money
Made it
to
simple.
keep your business going.
Mm-hmm.
How is, I am struggling with how that would work here, because
This
it's
has to have a
VITA
blood
money.
test.
But it's VITA money, it's not state money,
Mhm.
it's VITA money.
Yeah.
So where is that gonna come from to
Right.
repay the VITA loan?
Right. So
We could get a veto on that.
it's 1201.
Yes, they.
Do you, I would say based on what I'm hearing from other committees beyond this one, because I am just the messenger. We just sort of let the forgivable loan program go this year and do more work on it and move the repeal of the sunset and some of these other pieces maybe, I don't know what's left. Or we work for the next 2 days to try and make the forgivable loan program pilot work for flood impacted areas.
I would love to see us figure out a way to make the flood impacted model work, at least get this established so that we can then build on.
It would have to meet a but-for test, so ultimately we may come back and say we couldn't do it. So we're gonna find a half an hour, and if we would only need 5 minutes if we let most of the rest of this go and just do the
Just
repeal
do
of the
that, but
sunset.
also have a clear understanding as to how is it gonna be paid back?
Mhm.
You don't have.
Oh, that's the
Absolutely.
key, that's the key.
Right,
That's,
right.
that's
So-
kind of key piece.
Yeah.
We need to
Same back through tax.
the auditor to
Right.
find out we're using other people's tax dollars.
Joan has.
Well, under the original plan, it was based on the additional economic activity. This plan is a little bit different, and I'm not sure these flood impacted businesses would qualify for veggie since there are such strict requirements on wage pay. You can't be in a limited local market, so a lot of the retail, the restaurants wouldn't qualify.
Right.
Do we want that to be the user?
And I'm wondering if it's not necessarily just the flood impacted businesses themselves, but those areas, because they may be able to hire people.
So maybe in a particular area that was flooded.
Right.
The businesses that are
Yeah.
located there.
So that's
That would
kind of
be
what
a
I was
way.
saying,
Doing
like,
expansion.
right, or it could just be capital improvements that frankly, I think may path.
Then I'm with Senator Clarkson, I'm trying to get something good.
Yeah, we've been, it would just be great to get this pilot off the ground.
And again, if we look at it and Cassie can't live with it and it doesn't make any sense, doesn't work, we're not gonna do it. I'm trying to decide if we need 5 minutes to repeal the sunset or 30 minutes to understand the final language changes we're gonna make.
And Cassie, yeah, I guess the question is, what do you need to?
Yeah, so for
To go
this, the appropriation needs to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to understand what are the conditions under which that loan will be forgiven?
Right.
How difficult is it to achieve forgiveness?
Mhm.
Because that is VITA money out there, and we don't wanna have to use $350,000 to just pay off bad loans.
Mm-hmm.
And is that also, that's not just the flood businesses, that's just in general, this forgivable loan program, correct?
Well, that was
That has
my
to be
understanding,
retained.
yeah, there's only there's one $350,000
Right.
appropriation.
Right. But I just want to
And they would have to meet
understand,
a strict
Is that
but-for
in the
test
budget?
that Vita felt
Right.
comfortable with so that the money was repaid, otherwise the
Right.
risk.
Is the 350 in the budget?
I don't know. I actually don't.
I think
I
it's
don't
right
think
now.
it is, though.
There's
I don't
no
think-
money in the
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah, it's not, it was, I mean, it is $350,000, so could we advocate for it? Yes, but I don't think it's. in the
But it's
budget.
also
Jeff,
not
Jeff.
supposed to be spent, it's supposed to be the beginning of a reserve.
But it's still to be appropriate.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's not, we would wanna do more than just
Jessica.
So when you're done with the
Benefit.
conversation,
Uh-huh.
I did note that there was another, section
What we're
4
done.
about the VECT membership transition period
That's
that
indeed
I,
good.
okay.
Based on the earlier.
Okay, phew, because
Yeah.
that is,
You- this
that was
isn't
giving
our
me
own
like,
thing. Basically, we have to decide
No, I
if
get
we're
it.
just doing the
I-
appeal and that's 5 minutes, or we're taking language and we're doing something. I don't know that we have time for a conference committee on this, so we'll just have to see. So we'll,
Yes, it's-
but people should plan to be
Yeah.
here at 8 AM on Thursday unless we figure out another time that works for everybody.
I think we need to figure out another time that works for everybody, is what I'm getting a sense of from you two.
I could give you a date if I have to be.
I can be.
So we'll hold that, and if we can find a lunch that everybody's available, Magalis can start working on.
Or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Sometimes, I mean, 3 of us know that we can count on you
Well,
to make that decision.
One day we did it, we all.
Yeah,
So
about
Thursday,
Sarah
I can,
Clarkson.
every unless GovOps goes like,
Do 4:30.
yeah, I'm happy to.
On what day?
Now Thursday, I have to say Thursday's a challenge. Anyway, I'd rather do 8 on Thursday.
Do it tomorrow.
What? Tomorrow, Wednesday, okay.
4:30 tomorrow.
Will everybody be ready with the homework necessary though?
Yeah.
By then?
I know, y'all, it'd be good to have some talk offline.
So looking at Thursday,
And we have drafts.
Friday.
I think everybody hates 4:30 on
Okay,
Friday.
then noon on Friday.
Can people do noon on Friday?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna meet at lunch on Friday to finish this.
Okay. And who's supplying lunch?
Oh.
I need more. than that.
You're not getting late.
So we have the Senate at 11:30, you know that, right? The floor at 11:30.
So when we're done with that, we'll come back in here.
Okay.
I don't know how. So we're off